Hello and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening at a safe distance by Effie Samra. Effie, how are you this evening?
I'm not too bad, thank you, Kenny.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening as we always do with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 386,213 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 367,323 were confirmed negative and 18,890 were positive. There were 43 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, but again, there were 0 new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. Again, as we always do, we remind you, if you are showing any symptoms at all, please do book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 262 were in hospital last night and 4 of those were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show 46,511 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 98. And this number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And before we get on to the rest of the headlines today, I would just remind you, if you want to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag ScotlandAT and the number 7. We will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. But we start today with the briefing that the First Minister gave this lunchtime, and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon responded to a question from Broadcasting Scotland about Benny Higgins, the chair of the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, after he described Friends of the Earth as ideological zealots who would throw the economy under a bus to achieve their own objectives. He also suggested the oil giant BP was a model for the market economy responding to climate change and well-being needs. Sturgeon said that she remains committed to a zero-carbon economy and highlighted the Scottish Government's adoption of progressive policies like Commonweal's proposal for a Scottish National Investment Bank. Higgins, a former banker who now works as an asset manager for the Duke of Buccleuch, has been criticised by several think tanks and campaign groups, not just for his language, but also his reports focus on economic growth and the power of the private sector, without a clear understanding of green or well-being economics. So, Effie, what did you make of the First Minister this afternoon?
Well, you have to obviously use political language or diplomatic language where such language is required. I think she made her own personal views quite clear, especially in the second part of her answer. Given that obviously he was appointed to do this job, she expressed herself in a positive way in regards to the report, and I think the report has been endorsed by several bodies who are now going to be working in that direction. But in regards to my personal views, you know them well, Kenny. I have a big suspicion when it comes to outsourcing vital functions of the state to the private sector. Again, there is an argument for. Is there any room at all for the private sector? I'm sure there is, but you've got to be very, very careful, especially where the climate concern comes in. And in regards to things like COVID, which we didn't know about 7 or 8 months ago, now this is an added concern, and well-being and poverty, and children's rights and older people's rights, and health. Have come to the fore in ways that we could not have imagined a year ago or a few months ago. These concerns are. I think the world has moved a little bit further beyond Mr. Higgins' thoughts. He's a little bit stuck in his own ways and in the ideas that he had. And like I said, there is room for manoeuvre and there is room for negotiating these views as well. But perhaps we need to be looking a little bit further in this moment, given the challenges in front of us.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of confidence in the Scottish Government that they are going to kind of take on some of these other views from organisations like Friends of the Earth?
Well, my personal experience, for all that it's worth, I'm not an engineer myself, but I'm very closely related to engineers, and I know for a fact that there has been a big, if you like, there's been a big opening out towards things like renewables, and I know that Nicola Sturgeon herself is committed to renewable energy. There's been a lot of investment, also has come from the European Union, which obviously now is another big challenge that we're going to have to think about. But renewables, Scotland is rich in that direction. And there has been both research and development in the sector. I believe that the Scottish Government are committed, ideologically, if you like, and politically, but the problem is being under the umbrella of the UK, to what extent you can implement this stuff is a matter for, much more in-depth discussion. Yeah.
And what would you think about this thing from Benny Higgins saying that BP is a model that we can look at as a positive example of the private sector?
Well, like I said, I think he needs to kind of update his phone a little bit, because I think he's kind of stuck. BP are known for, mind you, was it BP? Is it BP who pay a huge amount of tax in Norway? I think BP have a big presence in Norway.
All the oil companies pay significantly more oil tax in Norway.
So, BP could become a force for good if they were compelled by government policy to do this. They do have a lot of power. The problem is the UK government have traditionally taken the Anglo-spheric view and the Atlanticist view that you need to make things easy for these corporations in order to keep them. Norway has shown us that this is not the case. These corporations will stay because they need the resources. So, and let's admit, what's happening here in the behind the scenes. A lot of these BP people, the lobbyists, the people in Westminster, they are compromised by the people within BP, and they're giants, they're huge, so they can go in and they can make their presence felt within governmental structures. It's a well-known fact, and they do this internationally. They try, but again, let's bring up the example of Norway. In Norway, I'm sure they've tried, but they weren't able to do it. So within an independent Scotland, it would be then our choice whether they would have this power or not. Within the United Kingdom, they do wield a huge amount of power. BP, I don't think they're a force for good. I don't know where Mr. Higgins is getting his information from, but they hardly pay the tax that they need to pay in terms of workers' rights, in terms of ensuring, an eco approach to what they do. None of these things are done in the optimal way possible. So I do have to disagree with him. But as I said, given the amount of power that they have, they can be dissuaded. Is there the political will to do this? That's the big question.
Yeah, and you mentioned lobbying there. I mean, this is something that organisations like Commonweal have raised as a real problem in Scotland, that there isn't necessarily the transparency there should be around lobbying. Is that something that you think there's work to be done?
Oh, a huge amount of work, because let's not forget, a lot of these very large organisations, their tentacles, if they are planted in Westminster or around the London area, which they are, it's very, very easy then to almost worm your way up to, into through the Scottish structures, because a lot of this stuff is connected. So you don't have the power to simply disentangle this. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think there's a huge amount of work to be done on the whole idea of lobbying. There's lobbying for good, but there's also lobbying for illicit private profit, which is what a lot of these big corporations are about. Yes, do they fund research? They do. Do they fund university programs? They do, and I'm aware of many of them that have been funded. But the problem is they also bear an influence on these structures and the results that come out, and we see what happens in America. So you have certain things. According to this study, this has come out of this study. But then when you go into the funding of the different structures, you then come to realize how this research came to be materialized, and you realize that they paid for it. Now, it's a huge big question, and in a smaller country, you will need the transparency, and I think there is the will within both the Scottish people, but also a large section of the administration to do this. But let's not forget, at the moment, they already have that power, and they're using it.
Yeah. Well, we move on now. Just before we do go on, a couple of people commented on social media that I hadn't addressed the First Minister very politely. I should point out it was just because we weren't unmuted before. As I said, thank you, First Minister, when addressing her. And also, if you noticed me rushing away immediately after asking my question, is because I was bursting for the loo after sitting here for an hour waiting to get on to ask my question. So I do apologise if we appeared rude there. It absolutely wasn't our intention. But we do move on now, and around 100 school pupils held a demonstration in Glasgow's George Square today in protest at the moderation process undertaken by the Scottish Qualification Authority, to bring teachers' predicted grades more into line with historical norms for their schools. Around 130,000 results were downgraded, and data appears to show that pupils in the most deprived areas were more than twice as likely to have results downgraded than those in the least deprived areas. The First Minister conceded that pupils were entitled to be angry if they felt their results were downgraded wrongly, but stressed that the appeals process is free, that the SQA is well resourced to manage a large number of appeals, and that it was always expected that significant numbers of appeals would be necessary to get things right for every pupil. Now, Effie, this obviously has been a very difficult process, and there are obviously criticisms to be made. We've heard a lot of those, but we were talking just before we came on air. And you were talking about this issue where we know that poverty is a barrier to educational success. I wonder if you want to just give a wee bit your thoughts on that.
You kind of headlined that very beautiful. You said the lost Einstein problem. Is that what it's called? I think that just sums it up, Kenny. It used to be that the sons and daughters of the lords and the ladies and the doctors and the lawyers would naturally progress to become doctors and lawyers and merchants themselves and entrepreneurs and all this stuff. There is a fundamental injustice in accepting that as reality. And it is infuriating for any individual. I'm the mother of a child, as you know, a very precious 12-year-old daughter who, obviously, I love her as any mother would. And I am anxious sometimes where this discrimination starts and where it ends. I'm sure there was no intention here obviously going into the minutiae of this and the ins and outs of it. There will be, we could be here for hours talking about it. And as you said, maybe procedurally, there should have been a thing where it would have been the first or the second step, and university places should not have been made available, as it were, as a automatic result of the SQA marking. But obviously the appeals process is ongoing, and I understand that some universities have not closed their offers, and there are still discussions with the schools and the teachers. But the fundamental problem here is privilege. And this is what needs to be confronted with honesty, but also with courage. You and I are sitting here, we tend to be slightly paler, than some of our fellow human beings. That in itself is already privileged. Some people were born with one limb missing. We're already privileged in comparison to that. Someone who is incredibly privileged in their wealth or their connections, their offspring, we have almost come to accept that we will see them in positions of power. That is where the problem lies. So until you have begun to, and I think in Scotland we're actually doing very well in at least in my own experience, the little bit of lecturing that I've done within Glasgow University and my academic work, there is I'm looking for the right word, but there is people are not afraid. There is no hesitation, if you like. I mean, some people will always be to accept this, that there is an issue, which is a structural issue and a fundamental issue. In England, where I lived most of my life, this is an impediment. This is already an ideological impediment. People are more prepared to say, okay, well, I'm sorry, but you don't come from the right class. So until we have confronted that problem and looked in the mirror and said, right, this is what it is about. It's not about, the SQA, absolutely, get it right. But why do children from these areas inherently do? So this is the big question. Are we ready to take that on? We'll see. I think, obviously the United Kingdom being what it is, a very classist society, an elitist society. You have all the remnants of empire still very much. You have the lords and the ladies. You have all the feudal structures within governance and within the legislative chambers and the executive chambers. So this is a given within the United Kingdom, but not so much in Scotland. So perhaps let's think about, how do we tackle that? How do we get people out of poverty so that people can sit down and think about how can they become doctors? How can they become writers without having to worry, do I have enough, food? Do I have enough money to get dinner? Where am I going to live next week? Things like that. Yeah. And it does stop people. It does.
A number of educationalists have commented that part of the problem is the way we examine things. Now, part of the curriculum for excellence was meant to reduce the importance of this one exam at the end of the year, but this kind of closed book, unseen exams, it does seem to be something that does privilege people who have access to tutors and access to kind of even just the space and the time at home to study properly.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's maybe this is maybe a kind of red flag where we should be saying, okay, let's look at how we assess children's performance?
That, so I'm in the College of Social Science under the School of Education, and within the School of Education I've had the privilege, my own doctoral supervisor is Professor Bob Davis, who was one of the founders of the School of Education, and he himself started as a teacher, as a high school teacher. He has written a huge amount on this, and even as a head of school at Glasgow University at the moment, he's still very much involved in the fundamentals of Scottish education. There is a lot to be said about this, and I know a huge amount of research has gone into that. I will agree with you. Not everyone is designed to be able to sit down and within an hour and a half produce all their knowledge or be the best that they can be, or even, from a practical point of view, you may have a headache on the day. So what happens, if that is the case? So much more so if, there are problems at home, there are, you're not receiving proper, you haven't eaten breakfast, which we know does happen. It's not an extreme case. As you said, tutors, private tutors, we've seen all of that. There are different models that are being considered, and I know the School of Education at Glasgow University being pioneers in this. However, there is a practical thing. Yeah, you sit an exam, you produce a grade, you make it easy for people to assess you on the basis of that. So I think for the foreseeable future, there probably will be a tendency to accept that to a large extent, but I completely agree with you, and we've seen it with the younger children under lockdown as well. Some children perform very well in the classroom, and some children have shone through lockdown. Why is that? Because they've had the time to be at home and do their own thing and sort of deviate a little bit from the curriculum. as a Cambridge girl myself, and I was completely subjected to the brutality of A levels, tripos, this and that, and I did surprisingly well. But I like my own company, so within the classroom, I personally never performed. I was a bit of an underdog. I was a little bit. I was the weirdo. So I've had both, if you like, both sides of the spectrum. We are moving in that direction of opening up that perspective, of accepting a wider assessments process, if you like, other than sit down for 90 minutes and produce all your knowledge. I think we're a little bit away from that at the moment, so please study for your exams, do that and do as well as you can. But there are, in Scotland we're fortunate, there are different ways of getting into, say for example the School of Education, a lot of our honours students, it wasn't just straight A's, it was different routes. So examining apprenticeships, examining other routes within engineering as well, different routes, and that might be another way of considering different approaches to assessment. I agree with you. It's hugely important. Not everyone's going to do well within that 90-minute period. Yeah.
We will obviously keep an eye on this as the appeals process continues, but we do move on just now. And face coverings are to become mandatory from tomorrow in a range of settings in new guidance announced by the First Minister today. Further rules for the hospitality sector, including the introduction of new statutory guidance, have also been announced to increase compliance and to keep the sector open safely. These new rules will come into force from next Friday. Hospitality premises should be collecting customer contact details for Test and Protect. Tables should be pre-booked where possible with no queuing, and there should be no background music, and TVs should be muted to reduce the need for people to shout or to lean into each other. And also no more than 3 households at a time should be meeting in a group. From next Friday, it will be mandatory for premises to collect contact details of customers in a range of hospitality and public settings. And just quickly, the new guidance applies to any premises open to the public, including shops, takeaway restaurants, estate agents and beauty parlours, but not things like cafes and restaurants. Aquariums, zoos and so on, and other tourist heritage cultural sites, banks, building societies and credit unions, cinemas, community centres, crematoriums, funeral homes, libraries, museums and galleries, places of worship and post offices. So I think we've seen most people kind of getting on board with the mask thing. Every time I've been in the post office or the bank in the last few weeks, and it's only been once or twice, but I have been wearing my mask. But obviously we've seen in Aberdeen this past week, we've seen this outbreak that's caused the national case numbers to spike. Do you think this kind of mandatory guidance now is going to make a big difference?
Obviously, the big disclaimer here, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, but purely from empirical evidence, from what we've seen in the last couple of months, masks are working. I will go as far as to say they don't seem to be working, they're actually working. They work and they protect, they form a physical barrier. I'm a bit shocked, to be honest, when at the end of January, when coronavirus was first, the first whisperings, what's happening, down in China, I thought within a few weeks, people, there would be big news thing flashing on our screens, just purchase masks or get masks from this, medical center, and don't dare go. I think if we had done this from back in February, we may not have seen as many deaths. They seem to be working. I really like that. I think some of us are naturally cautious, but some of us need to be told. So for those of us who need to be told, let's be told what to do. If it's going to save even one life, come on. Doctors and nurses do big shifts, completely covered in different items of PPE. Why can't we not do this? And also the tracing. To be honest with you, I don't really go to pubs, so I've not been in about 5 years. But it's I wasn't aware that they didn't take people's details. It emerges that they were relying on people's goodwill to submit that. Again, hugely important. Leave your details. Anything that's going to stop even one case is huge and fundamental. There will always be people who aren't able to wear a mask, be it a heart condition, be it asthma, be it a lung condition. So let's help them to come out and feel safer. We've been doing great. I've been literally praying every night you come on. I go on the Twitter of the Scottish government. Please make it that there's no deaths today. And it's been not bad. Obviously, it's very vulnerable. It may change. We've seen what we've seen in Aberdeen. So let's just keep going. I think I'm a big fan of mandatory when it comes to health. If it's got to happen, let's just do the right thing,
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like wearing a seatbelt.
Well, that's the thing,
We don't think of that as an intrusion on our lives now.
I remember when they were first implemented, my dad nearly burst an artery. I am not doing that. But look at him. He's used to it. He's fine. All these decades later. So people, it's okay. Let's do it. Yeah.
Well, speaking of people who maybe don't always obey the rules, Downing Street has been urged to provide proof that Dominic Cummings did not make a second trip to Durham during lockdown, amid claims that the police failed to properly investigate alleged sightings of the PM's chief aide. 2 of 4 people who claim to have seen Cummings on what would have been a second visit to the northeast of England have complained to the police watchdog, accusing the Durham force of not fully probing their claims. Cummings has consistently denied returning to Durham on the 19th of April, days after he came back to London from a trip that was subsequently exposed in a joint investigation by The Guardian and the Daily Mirror. The chief advisor has said that that phone data and potentially CCTV footage would prove that he was in London, and The Guardian today reported one alleged sighting of him on Hampstead Heath that afternoon. However, neither he nor Downing Street has gone public with the evidence they say they have, and which Boris Johnson says he has seen, and pressure is mounting again for full transparency to answer lingering questions about his movements. Cummings' initial trip to Durham caused widespread anger and is cited as one of the chief reasons for the public losing faith in the UK government's handling of the crisis. I know, Effie, that you are not particularly impressed with Dominic Cummings.
I love Cummings. Come on, just keep he is the gift that keeps... Cummings is a Dickensian character. Now, I don't know whether he's maybe becoming a bit of a sci-fi here as well. Did you hear yourself? Sightings. So, sightings of Cummings. I don't know where we're going with... I'm sorry, Kate. I don't know where we're going with this. He's such a... I don't know if I'm actually maybe complimenting him by saying he's a dark... He's not. He's just a bit... Again, he's a son of one of these privileged families who think themselves above everything. He was raised to believe himself great. He will do everything to keep out the riffraff, like you and I, and to ensure that he was basically born to be ruled. I don't know whether I'm sure you watched that video when he says. Remember, it was a few years ago when he said, if I get my hand, if I get control of when I get control of Downing Street, So this is almost something that was destined to happen in the UK. It's like fate, dark fate. Second sighting of Cummings. Cummings comes and goes as he pleases. I have never doubted this for 1 second. And for the people who are, sort of looking to find his different sort of movements within that period, please stop looking. Cummings does whatever he wants. And Boris Johnson is so compromised by the whole Cummings affair that he will never... we hear that Boris is obviously in Scheveningen, isn't he? He's holidaying at present. So, yeah. So he will never, ever come out and condemn or chastise Cummings in any way or form. This is a performance. This is a feudal circus of the most laughable or the lowest kind. So where are we with Cummings, the whole Cummings things? I'm just literally just waiting for the next episode. You know what I mean? He's now a spitting image. He's coming back as a spitting image, the thing, rubber. But sorry. Cummings. Why are we ruled by Cummings? I think we need to look into the fundamentals of that. There's a big question about what's happening there, what's happening, what is happening to us, and why are we prepared to simply just accept that?
Yeah. Well, we move on to another Downing Street resident, and extending the UK's furlough scheme would leave some workers trapped in false hope that they could return to their jobs after the coronavirus pandemic, Chancellor Rishi Sunak said today on a visit to Butte. With redundancies mounting, opposition politicians, think tanks and third sector organisations have said Sunak should extend the job retention scheme, which is due to expire at the end of October, until the economy is strong enough to support more at-risk workers. Sunak has said there is no question of a wholesale extension of the scheme. It's wrong to keep people trapped in a situation and pretend that there is always a job that they can go back to, Sunak told BBC Radio Scotland. He said the government had taken action to provide people with new opportunities, including apprenticeships and training, during what is unquestionably going to be a difficult time. Last week, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, a major think tank, said that closing the furlough scheme early would be a mistake that would cause surging unemployment. Their report claimed that extending the scheme would largely pay for itself by avoiding job cuts. The Bank of England said it estimated 7.5 million workers had benefited from the furlough scheme at its peak, and that 4 million had now returned to work, while 3.5 million were still on furlough. The central bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, said yesterday that some parts of the economy would no longer be viable once the fallout of the pandemic clears, with hospitality and leisure looking especially vulnerable. Now, Effie, we've talked quite a lot on the show recently about how risky it is to be closing down the furlough scheme while there are still people unable to get back to work. But this comment from the Governor of the Bank of England really jumped out at me, this idea that the hospitality and leisure sectors aren't going to be viable after the pandemic clears. How big a concern is that we've got someone so powerful saying that whole sectors of the economy just won't be viable?
It's a big statement, isn't it? I've got to say I've never been part of the hospitality industry, so I don't have the insider's perspective on this. But even just considering the calamity that has been COVID, and the fact that, just think about it, the first thing that you're not going to do is try not to go to a hotel or a restaurant, because that is pretty much other than going into work, this is something that you can control. And if you don't go, you are, protecting yourself against a very, very dangerous virus. So if you can almost control yourself and you don't have to go, you may choose not to go. So I think that from that point of view, logically, he has a point that the hospitality industry had for a very long time, pretty much post-war, based itself on this expansive model. Let's get more people in. Let's get more people, prepare more meals for more people. Also, I'm going to have a little moan about, all of these sort of cookery programs and chefs. Let's get people out. Let's get people into restaurants. And a huge, big sector of the economy has now metamorphosed, if you like, into this kind of the food and the restaurants and the fast food chains and all of that stuff. There's a big development at the moment in Paisley, and I think about 60 or 70% of that is related to restaurants and food. So if you could, and some of this is not even open. So if you think about the future of that over the next 5-year curve, considering COVID and the fact that we cannot control COVID, where is this all going to go? And the people who are currently employed by the sector, and there's a lot of them, I think we have been disproportionate in, aiding and abetting more McDonald's and more Nando's and more, Costa Coffees and all the rest of it, possibly to the expense of other sectors of the economy. And we are now facing that huge problem of people being dependent on that because their livelihood is connected to it. Extending the furlough would be one way. But in my humble opinion, there needs to be possibly a little bit more thought given to how you're going to do this structurally, as opposed to just, ensure that people survive over the next 12 months. But then where are all these people going to go? Because even from an environmental point of view, you cannot simply keep on opening more restaurants, even from a health point of view. On the one hand, you've got the meal deal, Rishi's meal deal thing, and on the other hand, you've got Boris's eat less calories. So, you've got all these contradictory things happening, and there isn't one serious, health-oriented, well-being-oriented policy. Yeah. You can't have excessive economic growth and well-being all in the same sort of, happening at the same time. Sometimes you've got to make some hard choices. What are these going to be? I think it's a question to be asking at this time, while obviously supporting people. I think Sunak, obviously, Sunak is who he is. Also, who he's connected to, who his family are. These people have no concept of what it means to be needing furlough or surviving on minimum incomes. They have absolutely. So he will simply just reiterate whatever the government policy is, but accusing people of just resting and trying to do things easily and thinking that there'll be a job to go back to. I don't think anyone's thinking that. I think people are looking to survive at this moment.
Yeah. Well, we move on to another economic story, and Michael Gove today said he was confident a free trade deal would be clinched with the EU, as there had been a distinct change of tone from the bloc in recent weeks, allowing progress to be made. I'm confident that there will be a deal. I think there has been a welcome change in tone over the last few weeks, Gove told reporters in Portadown. While UK ministers have always said they believed a deal was possible, the comments from Gove, who is one of the most senior Brexiteers in the cabinet, was distinctly more positive than in recent months. The EU is willing to compromise by softening its demand that the UK heed the rules on state aid in the future, according to reports earlier this month. They said Brussels could agree a compromise entailing a dispute settling mechanism on any state aid granted by the UK to its companies in future, rather than obliging London to follow the bloc's own fair competition rules from the outset. Now, I know you are not one of Michael Gove's biggest fans. Do you think this does herald some sign of compromise, that there is going to be some sort of deal done before the end of the year?
I think Gove knows and Johnson knows that if there is no deal, there will seriously be. I don't like the word riots. I think it's a little bit of a blanket term, but if you're looking at food shortages and medicine shortages, you could be looking at very, very urgent problems, which may incite people to act in ways that they've not contemplated before. They know this very, very well. They also know figures, Kenny, that you and I don't know. They are privy to information that we don't have. But obviously, we know enough to know that nearly half of our food supply chain comes from the EU. Pharmaceuticals, even worse. You've had Dr. Philippa Whitford sit in this chair previously, only just a few days ago, and she was detailing the whole idea about the diabetes medicines, isotopes. Now, these are medicines that some of these medicines cannot be stored. So you cannot have these draconian lorry parks situated within the county of Kent and be solving that problem. Kent lorry parks will not solve the problem. So they know the urgency. They have to do something. What are they going to do? I couldn't tell you. I don't have the crystal ball, but we know that Johnson is very prone to U-turns. Johnson has no shame. So one day you could have him saying, oh no, we're not going to do this, and what do you know, the next day he comes out and very, very similarly to what's happening within the Northern Ireland, the border. He said there will be no impediment to trade, and what do you know now, there are apparently a minimum of 3 forms that have to be completed in order for goods to cross the border. So he is known for this, and he will feel absolutely no problem in coming out and making any concession that is needed. Is he going to do that? I couldn't tell you, but I'm also aware that he probably will have to. From the EU's point of view, they wouldn't want absolute mayhem. No one wants the pandemonium that promises to be a no-deal Brexit. We know that the French have historically been a little bit more resistant. Emmanuel Macron is a man of, he is a Frenchman. He believes in Europe. He has always made that very obvious. Personally, I support that view. Germany, Angela Merkel has always been a bit more diplomatic, but are they also going to try and soften the position and facilitate something? They will probably be inclined to do that. Maybe not so much from a political point of view, but more so, I think, from a practical point of view. What's going to happen? Do I believe Gove? No, I don't. But I think the change in rhetoric might be something interesting here. Cummings might have programmed him to prepare the ground for something.
Well, we will obviously wait and see.
We'll keep an eye on Gove.
How that develops. But we move on now to the Middle East. And Lebanon's president said today that the investigation into the biggest explosion in Beirut's history would examine whether it was caused by a bomb or other external interference, as residents sought to rebuild their shattered homes and lives. Rescuers sifted rubble in a race to find anyone still alive after Tuesday's blast that has so far killed 154 people and injured 5,000, and smashed a swath of the Mediterranean city and sent seismic shockwaves around the region. The cause has not been determined yet. There is a possibility of external interference through a rocket or bomb or other act, President Michel Aoun said in comments carried by local media and confirmed by his office. Aoun, who had previously said explosive material was stored unsafely for years at the port, said the investigation would also weigh if the blast was due to negligence or an accident. 20 people have been detained so far, he added. Now, there's been a number of people, a number of countries, in fact, have commented on this. The US has said it doesn't rule out an attack, although we know that Trump has his own ideas about what's going on in the world generally. Israel has denied any involvement.
I believe there was a tweet, or was it something from one of the ministers in Israel, which was very provocative.
Oh, it was a former member of the Knesset who talked about this spectacular pyrotechnics display, which was something for the Israeli people to celebrate. Hezbollah have denied storing weapons nearby, which was something that they'd been accused of, that they were somehow involved. We've also seen protests in the streets. This was something that was happening in Lebanon before the pandemic hit. There's been an economic crisis in the country for some time, which is now a political crisis, and we're also now seeing food shortages as the only grain silo in Lebanon
because it's
was
connected
destroyed.
to the silo.
So, I mean, it's a horrible situation. What's your feeling about how things are going?
Lebanon has suffered so much, Kenny. I have two, I wouldn't say good friends, they're distant friends, but always, it's the whole sort of Christmas time and birthday, hi, how are you? And obviously, there is a sort of a sentimental attachment to the tragedy that the Lebanon has suffered. Such a horrible thing. I'll say something which maybe or may not be connected, but Richard Thompson kind of hinted on that a couple of days ago when we were together on the program about, first of all, carelessness, but also accountability when it comes to these things. Let's not forget, an accident can happen anywhere. I mean, we've had Piper Alpha, an accident is an accident, and they are horrible, and tragically they do happen. The thing that I thought was quite interesting, for all the wrong reasons, was when Emmanuel Macron was in Beirut yesterday. And made a promise of aid and financial support. There was this lady from the crowd who said, "Don't send your money to the corrupt government." And he responded and said, "No, I won't. I'll make sure it reaches the right people." Yeah. That was an interesting sort of, little clue to all the behind the scenes sort of workings within Lebanon. There is a lot of that, and that may or may not be connected to the present, obviously, tragedy that's happening at the moment. But you have a lot of forces. You know, the Middle East is burning, and it was way before the Iraq War. I was talking to someone the other day, and you know, she was telling me about an Iranian lady in Scotland, and going back to the Shah, going back to the Iranian crisis through the 70s, and then the Iraq War, Blair and Bush deciding what the future of the Middle East was going to be, and then that went, you know, across the sea to North Africa, and we saw what happened with Libya. So it is sadly not a stable place, and obviously we've had the horrible thing in Syria. The Lebanon is right in the middle of all of this, and what can I say? Whether it's linked to carelessness, whether it's linked to some other oversight or some deliberate mistake, nobody knows at this stage. But you know, it's the Middle East for me is a big thing that sooner or later the West is going to have to address.
Yeah, and as Effie said, there are concerns obviously about where money might go. Most third sector organisations are recommending if you do want to make a donation, then the best place to do that is through the Red Cross in Lebanon. So if you feel the need to donate, then that's the place to go. We move on now, though, back to Scotland, and social care workers, people over 55 and household members of those who are shielding will all be eligible for the free seasonal flu vaccine. The Scottish Government will look to extend to those aged 50 to 54 if supplies of the vaccine allow it. This winter, to protect those most at risk from concurrent infection of COVID-19 and flu, the Government is expanding the vaccination programme to new groups and increasing capacity to vaccinate more people than ever before. Groups who will continue to be eligible for the free flu vaccine include those aged 65 and over, those with underlying health conditions, pregnant women, children aged between 2 and 5, primary school kids, healthcare workers and young and unpaid carers. Now, as somebody who is entitled to a flu vaccine myself, this is something I've been thinking about a wee bit. There's obviously limited supplies, and clearly this year we want to avoid at all costs a flu pandemic
on top of
that then will make it much harder to deal with residual COVID cases. Do you think this is this going to be enough, do you think, or should we be looking at expanding even wider?
It's hard for me to assess this, Kenny, because I've obviously, you know, again, I don't have the medical background to be able to answer this adequately, but purely from an anecdotal and social science point of view, I think this would be the year to consider the widest umbrella possible, because as you said, you're looking at possibly two different things coming together in November or December, and where do you go from there? I think it's a great initiative. The wider it goes, obviously the better, but let's not forget, again, I've said this before in the programme, and you have as well, each and every individual's responsibility to make sure, wash your hands when you can, wear a mask, don't go to places that you don't have to go to, minimize the risks. This isn't going to be a Christmas like we've been accustomed to, but it can be just as good as Christmas as it's ever been. So, you know, I'm sure the Scottish Government will do their absolute very best to ensure that as many people as possible get access to it. But obviously there is a limitation, I understand, in the production of vaccines, and how much you can get access to it simply in terms of, you know, producing the dose. So they'll get what they can, but let's also make sure that we do our bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, of course, all the things that you would do to try and avoid a flu pandemic is wearing masks, washing your hands thoroughly, you know, wiping down surfaces as often as you can. Do you think as we get into the winter, there has been talk about kind of lockdown fatigue and COVID fatigue, where people will just get tired of these kind of restrictions? Do you think that is something that we need to worry about, or do you think people in general at least will stay conscious of the risks?
Well, this is where I think the media may want to come in and sort of rectify their bad image that has been building up over the last maybe 10 years or so. Bad people say bad things and they stir up all sorts of trouble. I think the media here can play a huge role in reiterating and reinforcing the argument of there simply must be no fatigue. Yet there can be, because we're human, and you just, human nature is such that you just want what you want. However, if the message is repeated sufficiently, let's all do our bit. I mean, from my own personal experience, I don't know how your family and your immediate environment have been, but all of the people that I've spoken to, they're very, very aware of it. But most of the people that I've spoken to, if you like, are in Scotland, and in Scotland we've had increased awareness of this, so we've been slightly luckier. My family in England and the people that I speak to also happen to be very, very aware of it. I just don't know the heavily the anti-vaxxers, and not in my social environment, and the protesters and the anti-mask wearers and people like that. So I have not spoken to these groups. But I think people, especially with the access that we have to information at the moment, I mean, you can get scientific papers, download them by either Googling or any other search engine that you may wish to use, and read up on this. So there is little excuse. Yeah, there can be fatigue. It is a risk. But as long as we are aware of the reality of COVID, it's a very dangerous disease. Perhaps we can all kind of, support each other and do a little bit to ensure that our immediate family and community don't succumb to this. I think you've had someone the other day comment on maybe perhaps younger people. I think it was Sam. Younger people, wanting to go, out drinking, pubs, and then forgetting about the social distancing and things like that. So people who do like a drink, again, think before you start. Where is this going to take you? Take adequate precaution. Make sure you don't end up hugging people or spitting or whatever in all directions once you've had a beer. It's the small things that will, I think it's the small things that will protect us from this. But this is going to be a vital winter, a vital time in ensuring that we suppress it, or we kind of give it more and more oxygen, which is not what we want to do.
No, absolutely. And finally tonight, immediate investment in jobs and digital technology will provide the foundations for a strong economic recovery from the coronavirus, Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop has said. To ensure businesses can continue to invest in their workforce, Ms Hislop announced that the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, which helps employers upskill and reskill their existing workforce, will be increased from £10 million to £20 million for the next financial year. Recognising the economic importance of digital capacity and capability, a further £1.5 million will be invested in Business Gateway's Digital Boost programme, almost trebling the capacity of that initiative for the remainder of this financial year. The programme supports small and medium-sized enterprises to take advantage of technology to help improve their productivity, increase their resilience, and create new market opportunities. Now, we've talked quite a lot about the economic recovery from the pandemic here tonight. Does this sound like something that you think is going to make a difference?
Of course it will. It's great that Fiona Hislop, I always listen to Fiona with great interest. She's a great worker, and I very much agree with her ethics. I think her heart's in the right place. I'm just worried about Brexit, Kenny, and I think, obviously 10 million, I think there's a 10 million difference in what was initially promised in regards to a 10 million increase. Fantastic, it's always welcomed, but widening your market and closing down the opportunity of being able to sell to your nearest neighbours is an oxymoronic desire to be entertaining at this point. So, I don't know, obviously, the Scottish government are trying to not cultivate, if you like, a rhetoric that's going to create a panic or fear, but we know what's around the corner. We know what's coming. And unless you're going to be able to sell to the people that you've always sold to, And let's not forget the UK is a service-based economy. And the Brexit red lines imposed by Theresa May and the Brexit gang have always absolutely negated any idea of a services exchange. Now that's going to be a huge, big. I mean, we know that companies have already closed down in preparation to Brexit. I very much welcome the news, but I think Scotland keeping a pace and keeping up with European standards, hopefully in preparation for a near future reintegration into the European market and the European reality may be of the essence right now. Of course, as it goes hand in hand with the things that have just been announced, retraining, fantastic, all this stuff. But hey, Brexit, big thing that scary stuff.
And just quickly before we wrap up, we've seen, obviously, we mentioned earlier, Rishi Sunak kind of taking the stick approach rather than the carrot approach, this shrinking the furlough scheme, basically to try and starve people back to work. Meanwhile, the Scottish government hasn't really been able to take more of a carrot approach because it's not been able to shift its spending priorities. It's not been able to shift money from its capital budget into the revenue budget due to the fiscal framework rules. How worried are you that Scotland is going to get left behind as the UK government is able to fund England by transferring that capital budget and announcing a whole lot of money for certain things, but the Scottish government is stuck with its limited budget?
I think it's inevitable that you will see an imbalance. And appointing Mr. Ross as Tory leader may be designed to sort of provide a buffer to that, but I don't know how successful that will be just in the rhetoric. I mean, we know he's a performer. How they're going to be able to justify that, I don't care, but I am actually very, very worried that starving Scotland may serve both an immediate economic purpose, but also a political purpose in almost proving their point, if you like, in reverse, in its own negation. Look at you, look at how poor and weak you are, you can't even get your act together, where Scotland is not able to raise the capital that's needed because it's not actually a country, an independent country, and it cannot do this. The stick approach, as you say, we've discussed it before. It is a neoconservative, Puritan approach. You have to go to work, get up in the morning, get up early, out of bed, quick, and, the harder you work, the more you'll earn. If people have not been able to see the total vanity of that statement over the last 10 years, it's the people who have been working the hardest, who have been the hardest hit by this whole approach. Clearly, people in England still can't see it. Okay, I feel for them. I am concerned. Rishi he was lauded, if you remember at the beginning of the whole furlough thing, that is, as an enlightened man. I have never bought into that rhetoric. He isn't. He's simply just a Tory apparatchik. He's just there to do as he's told and read out the lines. What the consequence will be for up here, I think it remains to be seen, but large sectors of the economy will be hit unless we find ways to mitigate it. But our ways under the UK umbrella, our solutions are very, very limited. So maybe a choice to be made, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Well, we will obviously look forward to that story when it comes around, but that is all we have time for tonight. So thank you very much to Effie Samara for joining us this evening. And thank you at home for joining us as well. We make these programmes for you, so thank you so much for joining us. We do have to ask, though, if you're able to support us, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month will make a huge difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, we do understand. We have talked, obviously, tonight about the limitations of people's incomes and livelihoods just now. But you can still make a big difference for us. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. Find us on Facebook. Just search Broadcasting Scotland. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos there, and then share these videos around with people. Let people know that you watch Broadcasting Scotland and let them know why. Encourage them to give us a try, to check us out, and hopefully you can help us build our audience that way. And finally, if you would like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we are always looking for new people to come and help out here, whether it's behind the camera or in front of the camera. There are lots of opportunities here. So do please get in touch with us if you have any interest at all in getting involved in TV production. We would love to hear from you. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So thank you once again to Effie. I will be back on Sunday with the full Scottish at noon. But until then, have a great evening and a great weekend. Good night.